Good morning slash afternoon slash evening, everyone. Imagine waking up one morning to find that a new power has quietly stepped into your neighborhood, setting up camp, strengthening ties, and reshaping the balance you've always known. This is not just a headline, it's a reality unfolding before our eyes. The recent moves by the United States military in Bangladesh have not only altered the regional equation, but have also triggered deep anxieties in India, a nation that has always been watchful of its borders and its balance of power. Today, I invite you to step into this complex story, where strategy meets suspicion, where alliances shift, and where every move carries consequences for millions of lives in South Asia. The recent defense cooperation between the United States and Bangladesh is not a sudden development, but rather the result of years of strategic calculation and evolving diplomatic engagement. At its core, this cooperation is shaped by Washington's interest in ensuring a stronger presence in the Indo-Pacific region and Dhaka's search for diversified security partnerships beyond its traditional reliance on India and China. Over the past decade, the U.S. has gradually increased its defense-related dialogues, joint exercises, and offers of advanced military technology to Bangladesh. The aim is to modernize the Bangladeshi armed forces while also aligning them more closely with U.S. standards and operational practices. This alignment is significant because it builds interoperability, meaning that Bangladeshi forces can more easily coordinate with U.S. forces in any joint operations or humanitarian missions in the region. From Bangladesh's perspective, the cooperation offers a mix of opportunities and challenges. On one hand, it provides access to training, modern military hardware, and international recognition as a rising strategic partner. This strengthens Bangladesh's ability to manage its own security, safeguard its maritime interests in the Bay of Bengal, and respond more effectively to disasters, a crucial capability for a country highly vulnerable to cyclones and floods. On the other hand, Bangladesh must carefully manage this relationship so as not to provoke unnecessary friction with neighboring India or its largest trading partner, China. Thus, Dhaka's participation in U.S. initiatives reflects a balancing act, gaining support without being drawn too deeply into the rivalries of great powers. For the United States, the strategic calculus is clear. Bangladesh sits in a geographically important position between South and Southeast Asia, with direct access to the Indian Ocean. This location makes it a valuable partner in the U.S. vision of a free and open Indo-Pacific, a framework designed to counterbalance China's growing assertiveness in the region. By building military ties with Bangladesh, the U.S. is not only investing in a stable and capable partner, but also gaining a foothold in a region where influence is hotly contested. Washington's initiatives, ranging from joint naval drills to defense dialogues, signal a commitment to long-term engagement rather than short-term transactions. However, this cooperation is not just about geopolitics or power projection. It also carries a message of partnership rooted in shared interests. Issues such as counterterrorism, maritime security, and humanitarian assistance provide practical grounds for collaboration. For Bangladesh, working with the U.S. enhances its international profile and showcases its capacity to engage on global issues rather than being seen solely through the lens of its domestic politics. For the U.S., it provides a chance to support a democratic partner and strengthen regional stability through non-coercive means. Ultimately, U.S. Bangladesh defense cooperation is an evolving story of mutual interests intersecting at a crucial geopolitical crossroads. It reflects the ambitions of a superpower to extend its influence and the pragmatism of a smaller state seeking to navigate a complex regional landscape. Whether this cooperation leads to long-term trust and partnership or sparks greater unease among neighbors remains to be seen. But there is no denying that it has already altered the strategic dynamics of South Asia in significant ways. India's concerns over the growing defense cooperation between the United States and Bangladesh are rooted in both history and geopolitics. For decades, New Delhi has viewed South Asia as its natural sphere of influence. Bangladesh, in particular, has always carried a special weight in India's strategic thinking, not only because of shared history and borders, but also because of the Bay of Bengal's role in maritime security. When the United States began strengthening its military presence and strategic ties with Dhaka, India interpreted this as more than simple cooperation. It saw it as a shift in the balance of power that could undermine its traditional dominance in the region. One of India's foremost anxieties is the possibility of strategic encirclement. Already, China's Belt and Road Initiative and its deep involvement in ports, infrastructure, and defense supplies across South Asia have caused India to feel increasingly cornered. The U.S. stepping in with military initiatives in Bangladesh amplifies this fear, creating a sense that global powers are crowding India's neighborhood and reducing its strategic breathing space. For India, Bangladesh is not just a neighbor, it is a gateway to the Northeast, a region that is geographically fragile and politically sensitive. Any perceived shift in Dhaka's foreign policy has direct consequences for India's security calculations in that area. India also worries about losing influence over Dhaka. For years, New Delhi has invested in building ties with Bangladesh through trade, energy cooperation, and political engagement to maintain stability along its eastern border. However, if Bangladesh develops deeper defense ties with Washington, it may reduce its dependence on India. This would weaken New Delhi's leverage and limit its ability to shape outcomes in Dhaka, especially on issues like border management, counterterrorism, and water sharing agreements. For a country that has prided itself on being the first responder in the region, being sidelined by a global superpower is an uncomfortable reality. Beyond the bilateral relationship, India's concerns are tied to the larger strategic rivalry between the U.S. and China. If Bangladesh becomes a site of U.S. military cooperation, Beijing could respond by doubling down on its own defense and economic engagement with Dhaka. This would turn Bangladesh into a space of great power competition, leaving India squeezed between two superpowers on its doorstep. Such a scenario not only threatens India's regional influence, but also risks destabilizing the Bay of Bengal, which New Delhi has tried to position as a zone of cooperation rather than confrontation. At a deeper level, India's unease also comes from its own identity as a rising power. New Delhi wants to be recognized globally as the net security provider in South Asia. When external actors like the U.S. step into this role, even in friendly cooperation, it challenges India's self-image and raises questions about its capacity to lead. While Indian officials may publicly welcome U.S. involvement as part of shared democratic values and Indo-Pacific security, privately, the concern is that Washington's growing presence dilutes India's centrality in its own neighborhood. In short, India's strategic concerns are less about the immediate military activities of the United States in Bangladesh and more about the long-term shift in regional dynamics. It is about influence, balance, and the fear of losing control over a space it has long considered its own backyard. This explains why every new development in U.S. Bangladesh defense ties rings alarm bells in New Delhi, forcing India to rethink how it will secure its interests in an increasingly crowded geopolitical arena. China's role in South Asia is impossible to ignore when analyzing the growing military moves of the United States in Bangladesh and India's subsequent alarm. For years, Beijing has been steadily deepening its footprint in the region, using economic, political, and military tools to build influence. Bangladesh has been an important part of this strategy. From infrastructure projects such as the Padma Bridge and port development to the supply of defense equipment, China has positioned itself as one of Dhaka's closest partners. This long-standing relationship means that any new U.S. Involvement in Bangladesh is not happening in a vacuum. It is directly intersecting with China's established presence, creating a triangle of competition among the U.S., India, and China. China has become Bangladesh's largest trading partner and a major defense supplier, providing everything from submarines to aircraft. These deals have made Dhaka more dependent on Beijing for military hardware and technical expertise. As a result, when Washington enters with offers of defense cooperation, training, or new equipment, it is not only challenging India's influence but also competing with China's established role. For Beijing, this is a matter of strategic concern because Bangladesh sits at the heart of the Bay of Bengal, a maritime zone crucial to China's Belt and Road Initiative and its access to the Indian Ocean. Control or influence in this space gives China greater security for its trade routes and naval operations. India views this Chinese involvement with deep suspicion, seeing it as part of the so-called string of pearls strategy, a network of ports and bases stretching across the Indian Ocean designed to encircle India. The U.S. presence in Bangladesh adds a new layer of complexity to this rivalry. On one hand, Washington's entry could serve as a counterbalance to China, something India often encourages at the broader Indo-Pacific level. On the other hand, if U.S. moves push Beijing to intensify its engagement with Dhaka, India may end up facing an even stronger Chinese influence in its neighborhood. This double-edged nature of U.S. involvement makes New Delhi's position particularly difficult. For Bangladesh, the China factor represents both opportunity and risk. Beijing has consistently invested in its infrastructure and offered favorable loans, creating tangible development gains. However, these projects often come with concerns about debt dependency and long-term strategic influence. By working with both China and the U.S., Dhaka is attempting to balance its foreign relations, extracting benefits from both sides without becoming overly reliant on either. Yet such balancing acts are fragile, especially when major powers are locked in a rivalry that often forces smaller states to take sides. At a global level, the China factor highlights the broader contest shaping the Indo-Pacific. The U.S. sees its moves in Bangladesh as part of a larger strategy to contain China's rise, while Beijing interprets these same actions as a direct attempt to undermine its influence. India, caught in the middle, fears being marginalized if the two superpowers dominate the conversation in its own region. Thus, the China dimension is not simply an additional detail, it is a central thread that explains why U.S. military cooperation in Bangladesh has become such a sensitive issue. In essence, China's role magnifies the stakes of every move. The competition is no longer just about Bangladesh's defense modernization or U.S. strategic expansion. It is about the broader struggle between two global powers, with Bangladesh serving as a key node in that rivalry and India watching anxiously from across the border. The unfolding situation in Bangladesh highlights how South Asia has become a central stage for global geopolitical competition. What was once a relatively overlooked region in world politics is now being transformed into an arena where the interests of major powers collide. At the heart of this competition are three actors, the United States, China, and India, each pursuing its own vision of security and influence. Their interactions in Bangladesh demonstrate how local developments can carry global significance, reshaping the regional balance of power. The United States has been working to expand its Indo-Pacific strategy, which emphasizes freedom of navigation, stronger alliances, and a counterweight to China's growing assertiveness. By forging defense ties with Bangladesh, Washington is signaling its intent to deepen partnerships beyond its traditional allies like India, Japan, and Australia. This move broadens its network of influence in South Asia and the Indian Ocean. For the U.S., Bangladesh is not just a partner in humanitarian operations or peacekeeping, It is a strategically located state whose cooperation could enhance American presence in a region critical for global trade routes and naval dominance. China, on the other hand, sees South Asia as an extension of its Belt and Road Initiative and a key corridor for its maritime ambitions. By investing heavily in infrastructure, energy projects, and defense supplies, Beijing has sought to anchor its presence firmly in countries like Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Bangladesh. Each of these relationships adds to China's ability to project influence and safeguard its trade routes. In this sense, Bangladesh is a vital link in China's larger chain of regional influence. For Beijing, U.S. defense cooperation with Dhaka threatens to undercut years of investment and could tilt Bangladesh away from its orbit. India occupies a unique but vulnerable position in this competition. As the regional power, New Delhi has long considered South Asia its strategic backyard. However, the arrival of both U.S. and Chinese military and economic initiatives in Bangladesh places India in a tight spot. On one hand, it welcomes the U.S. role in balancing China, but on the other, it fears being overshadowed if Washington becomes Dhaka's primary partner. India's concern is not only about losing influence, but also about being sidelined in its own neighborhood, while two superpowers dictate the terms of engagement. For Bangladesh itself, this competition brings both leverage and pressure. On the positive side, Dhaka can use the rivalry to secure more investment, technology, and defense support from multiple partners. This gives it room to negotiate better terms and avoid overdependence on any one country. However, the risk is that Bangladesh may become a pawn in the larger contest, with its autonomy compromised as it is forced to navigate between competing demands. The pressure to choose sides could destabilize its foreign policy, strain domestic politics, and invite unintended consequences for its security. In the bigger picture, this geopolitical competition over Bangladesh reflects a shift in global power dynamics. South Asia, once considered peripheral to global strategy, is now at the center of U.S.-China rivalry, with India caught in between. Every agreement signed, every port built, and every joint exercise conducted becomes part of a larger game where the stakes extend far beyond Bangladesh itself. The competition is not only about territory or resources, it is about shaping the future of the Indo-Pacific order. The regional security balance in South Asia has always been delicate, shaped by geography, history, and unresolved rivalries. The recent U.S. military moves in Bangladesh have added a new layer of complexity, altering perceptions of stability in the Bay of Bengal and the broader Indian Ocean region. What once appeared to be a relatively stable neighborhood, anchored by India's dominant role and China's growing but predictable presence, is now entering a more uncertain phase. Each shift in military cooperation, whether through joint exercises, port access, or defense agreements, ripples across the region and forces countries to rethink their security strategies. One of the main areas where the balance is being tested is maritime security. The Bay of Bengal, once seen as a quieter arm of the Indian Ocean, is fast becoming a contested zone, with U.S. involvement, naval drills, and defense partnerships in Bangladesh. The waters are no longer solely under the shadow of Indian and Chinese competition. The U.S. presence could ensure freedom of navigation and improve humanitarian and disaster response capabilities, but it also risks fueling a naval buildup. India, already concerned about China's submarines and port projects in the region, now has to factor in the possibility of U.S. naval assets operating closer to its eastern coast. For smaller littoral states, this rising militarization creates uncertainty about whether the Bay of Bengal will remain a zone of cooperation or evolve into another theater of rivalry. Another dimension of the regional balance is land security and border stability. India and Bangladesh share a long and sensitive border, which has historically been prone to disputes, migration issues, and cross-border insurgencies. While military cooperation between Dhaka and Washington is not directly targeted at India, New Delhi fears that it may weaken the spirit of bilateral cooperation that has been carefully built over the years. If Bangladesh begins to rely more heavily on U.S. defense support, India may lose some of the trust and coordination that currently underpins security management along the border. Even if this shift is subtle, it could complicate how the two neighbors work together on issues like terrorism, trafficking, and water-sharing disputes. The regional balance also extends to alliances and partnerships. South Asia has often been described as a chessboard for larger powers, but the new dynamics make it even more layered. Bangladesh's closer ties with the U.S. may encourage other smaller states like Nepal, Sri Lanka, or the Maldives to also explore alternative partnerships beyond India and China. If this trend spreads, it could weaken India's traditional role as the central security provider in South Asia and reshape how alliances are formed in the region. For Washington, this would be a success as it broadens its Indo-Pacific coalition. For India, however, it would represent a dilution of its influence and a threat to the stability it seeks to maintain. Finally, the regional balance is about perception as much as reality. Even limited U.S. military engagement in Bangladesh sends a powerful signal to the world that South Asia is no longer a space dominated by a single regional power. This perception alone can embolden smaller states, worry larger ones, and encourage external powers to deepen their involvement. The result is a more fragmented and contested security environment where stability is fragile and the risks of miscalculation are greater. In essence, the U.S. military presence in Bangladesh is more than a bilateral issue. It is a development that touches every corner of the regional security architecture. By shifting how countries view power, influence, and cooperation, it has already begun to reshape the balance that defines South Asia's future. Looking ahead, the future implications of U.S. military cooperation in Bangladesh extend far beyond the immediate headlines. The moves being made today are not isolated events. They are the early signs of shifts that could reshape the geopolitics of South Asia for years to come. These changes will be felt not only in Washington, Dhaka, and New Delhi, but also across the wider Indo-Pacific region. What makes the situation particularly significant is that it touches on questions of trust, sovereignty, and alignment in a part of the world where great power rivalry is accelerating. One likely implication is the emergence of deeper diplomatic tensions. India's concerns about being sidelined in its own neighborhood may grow if the U.S. continues to expand defense agreements with Bangladesh. Even if Washington frames its involvement as cooperative and transparent, New Delhi is likely to interpret it as a challenge to its influence. This could strain U.S.-India relations at a time when both countries are working closely on broader Indo-Pacific strategies. For Bangladesh, the closer it moves toward Washington, the more it risks complicating ties with India, which remains its largest neighbor and an essential partner in areas such as trade, energy, and border management. Another implication lies in the potential response from China. Beijing has invested heavily in Bangladesh's infrastructure, energy, and defense sectors, building a long-term strategic presence. If the U.S. accelerates its defense cooperation, China may counter with even greater economic or military engagement to secure its influence. This could intensify the rivalry between the two superpowers on Bangladeshi soil, forcing Dhaka into a delicate balancing act. For Bangladesh, the risk is that it becomes the focus of competing external pressures, limiting its room for independent decision-making and making its foreign policy more reactive than proactive. The regional security landscape could also shift in unpredictable ways. If U.S. involvement leads to more naval activity in the Bay of Bengal, it could trigger an arms buildup among regional powers. India, unwilling to concede space, might accelerate its own military modernization and strengthen alliances with partners like Japan and Australia. China, not wanting to fall behind, could expand its naval presence in the Indian Ocean, heightening the risk of confrontations. In this way, what begins as bilateral defense cooperation with Bangladesh could contribute to a broader militarization of South Asia. There are also domestic implications for Bangladesh. Stronger ties with Washington may bolster the country's global profile and enhance its capacity for defense modernization, but they could also invite internal debates about sovereignty and alignment. Questions may arise within its political system about whether Bangladesh is drifting too close to one superpower at the cost of neutrality. This could impact domestic stability, particularly if rival factions use foreign alignment as a tool in their political battles. Ultimately, the long-term implication is uncertainty. The U.S. presence in Bangladesh introduces a new variable into an already complex regional equation. While it offers opportunities for stronger security cooperation and development, it also risks sparking rivalries, straining partnerships, and reshaping alliances in unpredictable ways. South Asia's future stability will depend on how carefully these relationships are managed and whether cooperation can outweigh confrontation. The choices made today will set the trajectory for the region's balance of power in the decades to come.